Thanks everyone for joining us this morning to get a better understanding of the backhaul opportunity within Scotland's deposit return scheme and the opportunities that you have for collecting the waste recyclate from retail and hospitality outlets or return point operators. It's a good chance to hear from Biffa directly, their plans, how you can get involved, and also a chance for you to ask questions. There'll also be an opportunity to ask questions out with this briefing. But just before I start, for the clarity of doubt that DRS is definitely going ahead on the 16th of August next year, and it is, as Lorna Slater said to industry last week, it is an all-in, so it is inclusive of glass. I know many were hoping that we could take it out because of to align with the other schemes across the UK, but that is not going to be the case. Glass is most definitely included. SWA and other trade bodies are still seeking clarity on a number of outstanding issues that prevent the producers and indeed even the wholesalers from knowing exactly how they are going to comply with the legislation and adapt to implement DRS within their businesses. We are providing solutions to Lorna Slater, Scottish Government, CSL and SEPA and how the scheme could be simplified and some of the burdens eased. That includes the removal of online take-back, de minimis for small producers, extended exemptions for return point operators, and ensuring that UK-wide SKUs or EANs can still be sold across the UK. We hope to have clarity on two of those, certainly by the end of the month or the start of October. That was voiced at a system-wide assurance group that I sit on behalf of the wholesale producer industry on Monday. So fingers crossed we'll have some clarity forthcoming. It's not easy for anyone, I realise that, but certainly hopefully today we can get a bit more clarity on backhaul. So I'm going to now pass over to Carla Bryan, Senior Commercial Development Manager for Biffa. So thank you, Carla.
Thank you, Colin. Also just want to highlight David Wilson's on the call from CSL today as well. So got a brief 20-minute presentation that I'll whiz through that will give you a bit more clarity on what we're planning for go live, what we're looking at from a collection perspective from return point operators, and then where we feel there's a real opportunity to utilise existing infrastructure to support the backhaul aspect of the scheme. David, I don't know if you want to say anything before we start or add anything.
I think it's all been covered. To be fair, Colin's given a good overview of where we are in terms of ongoing discussions with SEPA and Scottish Government. Obviously, from an operational point of view, we've got the counting centres confirmed now in Eurocentral, Grangemouth and Aberdeen. Work in progress still with regards to bulking centres and various other parts of our mobilisation deliverables are underway as well at this point in time. So we're certainly moving forward, albeit there's still a lot of questions to be answered from Scottish Government and SEPA.
Perfect. Thanks, David. So just to provide you with an overview in terms of some really high-level numbers of the scheme, we are actively working, as David says, on our site locations, which I'll go into a little bit later. But effectively, we anticipate there'll be around 500 jobs created as a result of the scheme in Scotland, and working with a lot of the local authorities about synergies around backhaul as well, because there are impacts into the commercial waste streams for our own business and other providers, but also from a local authority perspective. So making sure we utilise absolutely everybody that is currently collecting material already today or visiting return point operators today for deliveries. So I will caveat these numbers, but we anticipate there's around 27,500 return points. And as Colin alluded to, there's ongoing discussions around exemptions at the moment. I am aware that there's only been 5 been granted at this stage under proximity, but we're working hard to look at how that process can be eased. So we're anticipating 27,500 from go live and around 10,000 daily collections based on our assumed numbers of returns. We won't actually know where everybody is until the RPO registration starts, which is due in March next year. Again, caveat that date at this stage. CSL will clarify nearer the time. So we also, the added complexity that consumer behaviour comes into this scheme very much so, and we won't actually understand exactly how much needs to be collected from each return point, because it's very much down to the consumer behaviour as to where they choose to get their deposits returned to. So from our perspective, at this stage, 27,500 return points. We've built a collection system and a collection model that determines and we think will work for each return point operator as to how they want to operate. So whether that be utilising a reverse vending machine, whether they're operating closed loop hospitality, so pubs, restaurants, etc., and then also manual return points. So we have three collection configurations that we've put together to support the scheme. And we anticipate there to be around 3 billion containers on market. Again, producer registration is currently running. People are registering items on their projected sales at the moment. So again, caveat that number. And we anticipate there's 12 operational sites that we will have potentially available for delivery into for partners, for backhauliers, as well as our own vehicles going in to deposit material. So really kind of high level numbers on the DRS scheme operational overview, subject to change. But at this stage, that's effectively what we're working towards. I mentioned the three collection systems. What we have done is built an operating model that's flexible, that allows us to deal with multiple return point operators in both remote areas of Scotland and also along the central belt. So RVM collections, cans and plastics will be bagged, as well as closed loop hospitality and manual, which will be whole for collection, whereas the RVMs, they will be compacted. All bags will be tagged and barcoded, which will need to be scanned by partners who are undertaking collections for us. So we are very happy to facilitate integration discussions at this stage with the IT teams between our respective businesses. We anticipate manual returns glass will be in totes. Totes have been signed off. We do have the specification of totes, and we anticipate an exchange collection for totes for manual return points. And then traditionally, as we see within our industry, closed loop hospitality and RVMs, the glass will be collected in traditional waste containers bins that you see today. As it stands, probably more so on the manual returns and also closed loop hospitality, bagged collections, the risk of fraud and security for the scheme is slightly higher given the fact they're whole material. From our perspective, given CSL's commitments to return point operators, we will need that material delivered to us at one of our Biffa locations within 24 hours of collections. And then we are looking to pass the liability of whole material back on to potential partners. That's something that we've committed to within our contract with CSL. So in effect, everything that you see in blue and the glass in totes for manual returns is effectively whole, and in theory could be taken and is still worth 20 pence and deposited into an RVM. So the risk of fraud and security is higher with those returns. So we are wanting complete visibility and expect to back some of the security arrangements that we're currently operating for our collection systems to give CSL and producers peace of mind around the collection system for that. So I say to everybody, think about everything in the manual category and closed loop hospitality bag collections as 20 pence collections in bags rather than waste material. So we have configured the collection system to allow, we aren't using traditional waste compaction vehicles for everything in blue and green. This is done on a multitude of vehicle configurations, and bags do need to remain whole and intact throughout the collection and into the delivery of a Biffa location. So we have flexibility within our collection system to collect all the sacks and all the bags on the same collection configuration vehicle, as well as exchange glass totes, so giving that level of flexibility in your operating areas. A kind of slight caveat with this, that the above is a guide only. Again, we are anticipating that collection frequency will vary depending on how much storage a return point operator has. So I would caveat this. You might find that small retail and manual returns actually need more frequent collections. And again, until registration has started, we won't actually know in terms of, I suppose, until the scheme goes live in theory, if there is a need for additional demand for collections. But there are certain requirements such as storage that need to be factored in, that we fed into the registration process. And again, assumed number of returns. We don't know, nor do RPOs until the scheme goes live, what they're likely to get. What we do have is obviously the bags sizes now confirmed and communicated. We are doing some trials as a business to understand the weights of the bags that are full and how many items can go in each of the 3 different bag sizes that CSL will be implementing for the scheme. All of them, I would at this stage, fall in line with manual handling regulations. So we've got no concerns around weights of the bags, but we should be able to give you more granular detail on kind of the volume of the bag, how many items fit in each bag, and provide some photos and evidence for you further down the line. So I would kind of heavily caveat this slide. And as I say, we'll be collecting this information at the point of registration, but it is a guide. So David mentioned collection infrastructure and the fact that we have our 3 counting centres now in terms of, as a business, that we're looking from a construction perspective to get up and ready. For us, their priority to get the counting centres up and ready so we can count effectively and ensure that deposits are paid back to return point operators by CSL. Bulking centres, as David says, we're making really good progress. Again, for us, it's all about reducing cost. So from our perspective, we're looking at existing locations for bulking centres, co-sharing locations with already sites that are waste permitted. So these are at this stage, I've got more granular detail on where we anticipate these to be, which we'll talk about at the end of the presentation. But geographically, we anticipate that we will need 8 bulking centres to feed into the counting centres. That may well change. And we do have an indication of where some of those bulking centres are. So we are also looking at building our PET facility to reprocess the plastics, which is at this moment in time still in negotiation, and we're not sure at this stage where that will be. But hopefully that gives everybody a guide of kind of the spread of locations that we're looking at across the estate. Again, highly caveated, is subject to change. But happy to provide further detail if needed on where these are, as David says, the 3 counting centres already being confirmed. I will share the slides after the presentation. I've got a couple of schematics in here just to provide people with some level of detail in terms of how we anticipate material to be presented and how we see the flow of material throughout the scheme. So these will be shared, and these are in there for information purposes, whether it be us delivering the service or potentially a backhaulier or a partner in place to service on our behalf. So I'll make sure that these are available after the call. And from our perspective, commercial arrangements will be put in place between Biffa and potential partners of the scheme. So we're really keen to start understanding based on our assumptions, where you already deliver, your operating areas, whether you've got capacity on your existing vehicles. We have drafted our heads of terms, which can be shared in terms of detailing KPIs and SLAs that we've signed up to and then that we would expect back to back for collection partners. Our big commitment is around material being counted within a 3-day period at one of our counting centres, that is for manual returns, and having complete visibility from a CSL perspective and integrate into our IT systems of where every bag and tote is throughout the network. We're equally eager. My IT team wanted me to ensure that this came across today. We are more than happy to start integration discussions and the art of the possible around that to support anyone that wants to become a partner with the scheme. So please feel free to reach out. Waste regulations do apply. So a waste carrier's license is needed. We are happy, and we do have a document ready to share for everyone for very high level requirements with potential partners, many of which has been included within the slides that you've seen today. And I've mentioned that the return point operator registration, which CSL will be running, is expected in March 2023. There are a lot of initiatives already going on, as kind of Colin alluded to, from our perspective around reducing the number of return points, potentially Biffa hosting return points so that we can be a shared point of collection for multiple manual returns to reduce the fraud and security risk of the scheme, and reduce the number of return points and burden on some of the smaller retailers that don't necessarily have storage. And we'll be working on that between now and kind of registration for March 2023. That's it in terms of my presentation and slides. If anybody's got any questions for myself and David on what I've presented.
Carlos, Colin Chapman here. Just looking at the map you put up there, I think we've probably discussed this before. I didn't see anything in the Dundee area or Perth area around any of the centres. Is that planned to change, or is that right?
Yeah, the map there has been updated, to be fair, Colin. So we are looking at a couple of sites in Dundee at this point in time.
Okay, thanks.
Why I caveated it, Colin. It's literally subject to change and does change.
Sure.
Yeah, from our perspective, priority for us is to ensure that we've got the right network up and running and the bulking centres are moving effectively where there's more opportunities coming in for us. So yeah, caveat at this stage, I could move that bulking centre on quite a few occasions.
No worries. Okay, thanks, Bob. Cheers.
Please either put your hand up or you can write a question in the chat box if you like. I'm sure there is plenty of questions, but actually just building on Colin's question there in terms of the bulking centres. So is the expectation, given that the material needs to be counted within 3 days of uplift, is the expectation that the backhauler, or the wholesaler will say in this instance, is expected to drop it off to a bulking centre on the same day, or what's the time scale? That's one question. The second question is, can the wholesaler just hold the material at their depot for Biffa to come and collect and then take it to a bulking centre?
So I'll start with the latter question, if that's okay. There are challenges on wanting to store material that you need to have an appropriate waste licence in place for that location, which takes some time to achieve. And from our perspective, if I think about the retailers wanting to backhaul, some of them are effectively looking to deliver into us without going through the waste licensing application effectively. So you do need a license for your location to store the material. There is also additional security requirements needed for the material. When you think about manual material being those bags of 20 pences. So there is that consideration. If you want to consolidate material, you do need to have a waste management license for your location. Some people already have, which is great. And then to your question around, sorry, your first question around delivering into one of our centres. Again, we feel it's the most efficient, depending on where your operating area is. There is also opportunity for where we feel not necessarily backhaul and collection from RPOs, but transport between one bulking centre down to the counting centre. If you can appreciate the geographics of Scotland, we need to get material coming off the islands and remote areas to one of those 3 counting centres within 3 days, which is going to be slightly more challenging than it is taking material from kind of more central belt locations. And we've just got to consider the security and ensuring that we minimise the risk of fraud where possible. We will be delivering and not holding any material on our vehicles overnight. Everything will be going to one of our centres if we're doing our own collections effectively. Andy, you're on mute.
Everybody is now a master lip reader for the announcement of somebody's name. Andy Ferguson. It's, to be very truthful, I'm not going to be entering into the backhaul situation, but I firmly believe in understanding my business all the way through the line. There's one obvious thing, that if anybody collecting waste in the return process, this is maybe a very stupid question, requires a waste management license because they're consolidating, does that not put any threat onto a retailer who's consolidating for 7 days to have a waste handling license?
Many of the retailers, existing retailers, have a waste management license because they backhaul a lot of material anyway.
And I'm thinking about independent retailers where you might be collecting only once a week. So they're going to be consolidating over a period of perhaps up to 7 days based on that guide slide that you had. That presents challenges for space to a smaller retailer anyway. But there's a reality that then they become a mini consolidation point because it's not a daily collection. I'm just querying, is there a threat to the retailer of having to get that license as well so that they can sit on the stock? So sit on the returns rather. Yeah,
no, there isn't. SEPA have published guidance around holding material. You can commingle the PET and the cans, and it does fall under existing exemptions. So they have published guidance on that. Probably.
So there's a specific exemption in place that allows them to keep hold of product until you guys collect it. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
An opportunity for SEPA to carry that over to the hauliers, backhaulers, wholesalers, retailers that are going to now require this management license.
We have been asking that question for some time, but the consolidation of material, large scale, will fall under waste management license. That's the message we've been given from SEPA. So yeah, we had asked that question and was hoping that it might fall under existing exemptions. But myself and David have been asking that very question for some months. So
on the too good to be true pile.
And I do understand it from their perspective, because in theory, if they give people the opportunity to consolidate, that's exactly what our operation is doing. So in theory, we wouldn't need to operate under a waste management license for our operation. So, but we were hoping and asked that very question. Whether or not they change their mind, we just don't know. We still continue to just raise that point on our SEPA calls, don't we, David? In the hope.
Without going into the detailed specifics of what the requirements are there a top 3 that you need to be able to demonstrate to be a waste consolidator, a waste collector? What is it? Is it separate space or?
There is a multitude of requirements that are needed. Yes, yeah. To have a waste management license to consolidate, the waste carrier's license to move is fairly simplistic, takes a number of weeks, very low cost. Waste license, not so simple. And there is also ongoing reporting requirements, i.e. quarterly returns that need to be published. Yeah, so it's not straightforward, unfortunately.
I know obviously today we were hoping actually to have more detail on the heads of terms and commercial arrangements and agreements that people entering into the backhaul arrangement would be subject to. I know that we're not able to get that clarity today. What would be the next steps for anyone that is wanting to learn more about what those terms are, what the commercial arrangements, financial recompense might look like, how and when will that be available? Yeah,
so we've got draft 1 of the heads of terms, so I anticipate that it will be probably tail end of next week. So it's with lawyers. So need to say any more. We were expecting it a few weeks ago, but I anticipate it. We've had draft one. We've just fed back some requirements of what we don't believe to be back-to-back from a back-to-back requirement perspective. So there's a few tweaks that they need to do in terms of the draft heads of terms. As soon as I have it, I'm happy to share it with you. Colin, if anyone's interested, if anyone wants an initial discussion outside of this forum, myself and David are really happy to have a more detailed discussion, obviously one-to-one around commercials, what that might look like, and more finer requirements in terms of potential operating areas, what we believe return point operators of those 20,000, where they might be in your operating areas. So we're happy to have another call. There is an inquiry form at the moment which gives very high level information around the collection infrastructure that I've just presented to you, but also around requirements for weighing, which is predominantly in the bin collections, and then also integration, so high level requirements on IT. So we have a document already for an inquiry form that gives some level of detail, very high level, but ultimately, yeah, we're expecting heads of terms to be in the next week or so.
It's certainly, by the signs of it, it's quite a sophisticated operation that you would require to have in place to be able to add in the backhaul facility. And in terms of an entrepreneurial soul looking at somebody that might want to create a business for the purposes of collecting as a backhauler into you, albeit not backhaul, but specifically collecting, it sounds on the surface of it that there's quite a lot of sophistication required that just would make it beyond commercial reasonableness.
We would be happy to, myself and David are having calls with, you know, some fairly small logistics businesses already, and we are happy and we have the appropriate resources in place to support them throughout the process. So
nobody's blocked any size.
Absolutely not. And I actually think critically from a smaller logistics perspective, particularly in the remote and the islands perspective of Scotland, they will absolutely be critical to the scheme delivery. So by all means, you know, we have the appropriate resource and availability of people within our project teams, within our respective businesses, to help people support them through that effectively if they are a small independent. Equally, you know, some of the conversations I've had today, Andy, are, you know, we don't think we've got that sophisticated IT integration. Well, it might be a case of we order more handhelds and they utilize our system in that respect. So there is nothing that's off the table, and that I feel that would prevent people from, you know, becoming part of, you know, of our operation for the scheme.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Just in terms of the, you know, the planning, obviously you put up the slides and the frequency of collections, etc. I'm never assume, but I'll ask anyway. The assumption would be that there is flexibility in that to take account of seasonal, you know, of the different seasons, holiday seasons, which will then North Coast 500 will be extremely busy during the summer, festival time in Edinburgh, Christmas in Edinburgh and Glasgow, etc., etc.
Yeah, Colin, as Carla said, that's very much a guide. So we'd work with the RPOs to actually understand what the collection profile is. And you're absolutely right, there'll be seasonal uplifts, which, you know, there'll be festivals, etc., that'll be on that we'll have, you know, we'll have to work to and support to get the volume moving. So yeah, that was purely a guide. And as Carla said earlier, that'll fluctuate or change as part of the registration process and once we're live as well. Because currently no one knows, you know, where exactly everything's going to be returned. So that there could be a small drop, massive returns in comparison to what we think it will be.
Well,
yeah, and that's a really good point, actually. You know, if people are sat there thinking, well, actually, this is, you know, until we know the knowns, you know, there is you know, you could enter a framework agreement with us where we call upon you to help and support where needed. From go live effectively, because we're effectively planning for every eventuality, because we just don't know what consumers are going to do and where they're going to deposit their returns. We have an idea, you know, and we're looking at other schemes that have recently just started, but actually, as David says, until it goes live, so there is opportunities. Not, you know, if there are people on the call thinking, well, you know, we're not going to know where everybody is, and this isn't for me. But actually, there is framework, or you know, there is framework availability to become a partner as well, where we can utilize you on an ad hoc basis for a set fee, for a visit fee, from go live as well. So it's not just here's a group of what we believe to be return points. So there is some level of flexibility with our partnerships as well, where we have to have the contingency planning in place.
Yeah, makes sense. Good. In terms of the segregation of the collection of material, with, you know, fresh food that's currently still on the vehicle when they're uplifting, how is that going to work? What's the regulations around waste and food?
Do you want to take this, David, because you've been...
Yeah, so certainly through conversations with SEPA, the totes and bags have been deemed as sufficient barrier between, you know, what's classed as waste versus the food. So in that respect, it should be fine. There shouldn't be an issue with that. Which, you know, you're not the first person to ask that question. Anybody that's transporting food we're having conversations with are asking that very same question. But yeah, within the regulations, I can't remember the specific regulation wording from SEPA, but it does state that there's sufficient receptacle barrier, as it were.
And particularly the glass totes, the green, I'm assuming that green plastic bottle is relatively representative.
Yeah.
Is there there must be some kind of handling and cleaning process that runs in the background for them to come back. Plastic bags are one-way traffic. So
yeah, plastic bags are essentially, they're single use. Right. You know, they're made from recycled material, they're single use, and they get recycled back into bags. The right. Totes get washed within the counting centres.
Right. And I'm sorry, this again might be a silly question. I'm a bit of a detailed person. How does a shop get the totes in the first place?
Biffa delivers them.
Right. So you will deliver it. You'll deliver in the bags and the totes.
Not the bags. The totes are delivered by Biffa. The bags are ordered by the return point operator through our preferred supplier, and which we're in the process of tendering at the moment.
So, yeah, just on that, Andy, there's been quite a few conversations around how we would envisage the backhaul tote aspect working. And it might be that we give potential partners a surplus stock to hold to effectively operate that exchange. Yeah. So from our perspective, again, nothing's off the table to talk around what might work for a business more so, but initially the mobilization, which, you know, is quite large scale. We're potentially looking at, from our perspective, to give as much information at the point of registration to return point operators as possible. The totes are stackable. So we'll also give a guide. We already have a guide actually around some trials that we've done around how many glass bottles they hold, and the kind of floor space that they take up. They nest within one another. So from our perspective, making sure that we give as much information to a return point operator as possible at the point of registration, that they make that selection. Actually, I'm going to order 3 because I know that this many fit in here, and my best guess at this stage on my returns is X. Same with the bags. We'll be doing all of those trials so people will understand what type of, well, how much storage space those bags will take up as well, both from a manual and
I would guess family of 2 operating self-analysis of cans and bottles into waste containers, about probably 25 and 35 bottles per tote, I would assume. Otherwise they get a bit heavy for handling and just bulky in space. And that just from my own Corona bottles, wine bottles, and juice bottles. They don't hold a great deal because they go in haphazard. They're not very carefully stacked. They're not in, the bottles aren't, toe to tail to get everything sitting nice and neat. They'll just go in. So there's going to be a lot of them in circulation.
Yes, I've got photos of evidence to prove it, of me stacking totes nicely and not so nicely. But we have done all the manual handling, so we know how much a full tote weighs, and we're very comfortable from a business perspective, both on the bags and the totes, that they're well under the regulations.
And the full tote stack as well. They've got the flip overs at the edge, so they will go up the way too.
Yeah, they'll nest on top of each other
when full.
Yeah.
It might be useful, given the level of detail with the conversation, which is great, if I share my trial data with you, Colin, around how the totes stack, all the dimension specification of the totes, and then the different trials that we've done with the weights, etc., because we've got that already. So, you know, great detailed conversation. So I'll make sure that you kind of get that evidence of our tote trials and things like that.
Well, that would be good, and then I can disseminate that out. Just one question, just when we're on the subject of glass, it might be the decision of somebody signing up to backhaul not to collect glass because of the risk to the other goods in their vehicle. Is there an option that somebody can sign up to say, yeah, I'll be a backhauler, but I'm only able to collect PET and aluminium, not glass? Or is that an all-in?
No, it literally, nothing's off the table. If, you know, from our perspective, this is an environmental scheme. This is not about us putting a multitude of vehicles on the site, on the roads in order to support the scheme. We want to utilise, where possible, additional miles and capacity that is already currently operating in Scotland. So if someone turns around and says, I just want to collect sacks, yeah, that's no issue for us.
Perfect. Okay. Any other questions from anyone else? Because between Andy and I, we're the only ones, and obviously Colin.
Well, one last, can a retailer heave all his empties into the back of his car and return them to you without having a license?
I missed that question. Sorry, Andy.
Can a retailer, so Andy Ferguson's corner store,
yeah,
collect his totes up, collect his bags up, and rather than have it reverse collected, can I just drop it round to the Grangemouth site because it's nearby? I'm not going to have I'm not going to have my carrier's license. So is the retailer prevented from returning his own stock?
No one's allowed to enter our site without appropriate waste carrier's license.
So the retailer can't return it?
Not directly to one of our sites. One thing I would say is what we can't stop or police from our perspective is that retailer taking it to a reverse vending machine.
Sure.
But ultimately, within our industry, you know, as we do today, no one's allowed to enter our sites to deliver waste without ensuring that they have the appropriate waste carrier's license.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Anyone, any other last questions? Otherwise, we'll give you your time back. No. Okay. Carla, David, thank you very much for hosting this. I think we've got a bit more clarity, but still more being required. What I will do is send this out to everyone on the call and those that weren't able to join. And if there is any other questions come through, I can forward them on, or indeed people can obviously speak to you directly. I think the inquiry form is also live. What website is that on, if anyone wanted to?
I'll share that with you for circulation for the members, for even those that some have missed it, if that's okay. If I get the trial, taking the action to share the inquiry form with you, and then also the trial data. So I'll make sure you get a copy of that to send to some members that aren't on the call today. No problem. Excellent. Lee, were you wanted to come in there, or? No, okay. Well, thanks very much everyone for joining, and yeah, we'll keep you up to date with everything DRS as things become clearer. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Much obliged.
Thank you. Bye now. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.